Greetings, friends. If you read last week's letter in the bulletin, you will know that we are beginning through the next few weeks to discuss the mission priorities in the path of discipleship. And the first one is got to be encounter. Encounter really makes us alive. It is what is foundational to all the other priorities, such as welcome, accompaniment, sending, everything, okay? Because we have to have this encounter to be empowered to work supernaturally. Now, in the Bible, all of God's servants had an encounter with God, and there are always these big encounters that come crashing into their lives. And what happens with each one is that God gives them a promise. And the promise is it is always impossible to fulfill. And when a person is encountered, they believe this promise. And when God fulfills it, everyone says, wow, that is God, and that God is real. And when we believe in this humble way, we become real as well. Now, the thing about these great divine encounters is that God is sovereign over them. Okay, we can't say, okay, today I'm going to have an encounter. No, it doesn't really work that way, okay, because God's sovereign over them. But on the other hand, one thing we can do is to know that God does still encounter us, not just the people in the New Testament and Old Testament, or not just some few saints that are in church history. He does and can. We have to know that. We have to believe it. We have to prepare ourselves for the possibility of this type of encounter. But we also need to know that God is always pressing in on us. And the reason why we don't really know that or feel that is that we're pushing out. We've got all these defenses around us. Partly because we know if God encounters us, we let God in, we're going to lose control of our lives. And that is scary. It is scary because when you encounter God, he puts us on a trajectory that we're not in control of. But that's the exciting thing about life, okay? And so this week's readings, I was thinking to myself when I first read them, that doesn't have anything to do with encounter, okay? It's got to do with humility. Okay, the Sirach reading is, praise of humility. And then the gospel, where Jesus gives the illustration of how we become great. And this illustration is in form of a banquet. When you go to a banquet, don't elbow your way up into the front seat and sit there like, wow, look at me. Because Jesus is saying, you don't want to look like a fool, okay? And have someone say, hey, listen, you don't belong here, go to the back. Rather, he says, go to the back. And then you could very well be invited up to the front, okay? Now, what has this got to do with encounter? Well, the kingdom of God is like a feast, okay? And God's the one who serves the banquet, right? And when we get up to the front, we're really are in a position to have an encounter with God because you're right there with God. It's a social event. And, God just gets along with humble people. I mean, think about it. Really? Don't you like to be around humble people? They're not always talking about themselves. They're interested in you. They're not, showing off. or trying to be something other than what they are. They're just real, simple. Right? Well, just like we get along with this type of people, God does too. Many times in Scripture it talks about how God rejects the proud. You can't relate with the proud. They're too busy relating with themselves. So this is important because a lot of people say, well, we're talking about encounter. Okay, what does it mean and how do you get there, right? Well, I think what the Scripture is teaching us today to prepare ourselves for that encounter, which is so important for us, is to really, really grow in humility. Okay? And that's a hard thing because, quite frankly, pride is deeply seated in all of us. It's totally irrational. But it's true. And so Jesus said you really need to focus on taking the last seat, never where you're at. Not focus in putting yourself up front. If we do this, we will set ourselves in a position to have an encounter with God, for Him to come into our lives. And finally, as I mentioned in the letter, we have to come to Mass that way too, because Mass is the ultimate encounter that we have with Jesus in the body and blood of Christ. And so many of us, maybe they're not all that prepared as we should be. Maybe we don't really realize that we're coming to Mass for an encounter with God, because we could just fall in the ritual of going. But if we do, and we're prepared and we have an encounter with God, then we can go out and fulfill our vision statement, right? We can't help but talk about Jesus and going out, changing the world around us. So, see you on Sunday. God bless.